So, is everyone comfortable? Let's begin with doing a little meditation. We're going to try to set a good special motivation. So, at the very beginning, we do some meditation to calm our mind. It's a little bit like playing musical chairs. Remember in kindergarten, musical chairs? When the music played, you got up and you walked around. So right now you're going to let the ordinary worldly mind not have a place in the seat of your consciousness, the seat of your attention, by just letting it be quiet for some time. And then we'll try to replace that with a positive mind. So relax your body and relax your mind. Remind yourself right from the very beginning that ultimately everything is empty of existing the way that it appears. The sense of self, the sense of truly existent others don't exist really the way that they appear to the mind. That all beings are laboring under that misconception. All of our kind mothers. So I'm going to watch my mind now and try to set a good motivation for their benefit. Begin by being aware of your respiration. Try to bring your attention inward, away from your senses, just being aware of the breathing. And then when the mind is a little bit centered, bring your attention just to your mental consciousness. Perhaps at your heart chakra. Very good. The area of the middle of your chest. Very good place to start. Keeping your attention there away from the cerebral region. Watching the contents of your mind, both the subjective states and the objective thoughts. And try to see them as transparent, not cultivating them, not paying attention to them. Let them disappear. Try to perceive behind them the constant nature of the mind, like a clear light. Any thought, any objective thought, any subjective response can be used as a stepping stone to recognizing that spaciousness, the clear light nature. But letting it go as though bouncing off of it, taking a step away from it, and using that occurrence to recall that its very presence, the very presence of the thought, implies the spaciousness of the mind, its non-obstructability. If the mind were solid, obstructing, if it were not clear, different thoughts could not arise within it. Your key word here is letting go of the thoughts, whatever arises, refocusing on just the basic nature of the mind within which the thoughts are arising. Practice with the body. Let go of the sense of the body. Try to focus on the consciousness to which it's appearing. The sense of self may appear to the mind as the meditator, as cultivating or experiencing this state. That too is just an appearance to the mind, dualistic appearance. Let go of that and let there be just the experience of consciousness, knowing the nature of the previous instant of mind. Ask yourself, whatever understanding I have of the mind, this clarity, is it something that's based on belief? Is it an assumption, something perhaps stronger than just a doubt? Is it an actual experience, an actual realization of that mind? Right now we're knowing the nature of the mind via a mental image that we're developing of it. For that understanding to be a realization, it would have to be one based either on direct perception or on inference. Within this quiet mind, try to recognize the extent of space is filled with living beings, sentient beings. Around us on earth here, the animals, insects, even spirits that we don't perceive, hell beings, gods. Filling infinite universes. And all of them want to be free of suffering, want to have the stable, highest happiness, if they could find it. But not knowing or not accepting the law of causation, karma, they often, out of desire for happiness, create non-virtue, the causes of suffering. Actually destroying the causes of happiness. Wanting to be free of suffering, they steal or engage in activities that create negative karma that are the causes of suffering. All our mothers have such meager joy within cyclic existence. For their welfare, I'm going to participate tonight to learn more about the mind, to control my mind. As my gurus, the great beings have done before. To get closer to enlightenment. So for that purpose, I'm going to participate tonight as an action of training my mind, developing my good qualities, my knowledge in some ways, my experience, being patient with those things I don't understand at first, developing a store of knowledge to be able to further investigate the scriptures, to understand emptiness, to develop a real experience of bodhicitta this lifetime. So for the aim of aiding sentient beings for their welfare, I'm going to participate tonight in order to quickly attain enlightenment. Relax. Bring your attention back. You feel way off in the corner there. You can sit over there. Would you feel more?
Actually, we're just visiting.
Yeah.
We're not staying.
Oh, okay. If you want to make a hasty departure, yeah, that's a good idea. Go out that door. That's good. Okay. So, anyone have any questions from last lecture or from what you've been reading? Chris? No? No questions?
Could you give a couple sema examples?
A couple of sema examples?
Yeah.
Examples of valid cognition? Valid cognition. So, what are the crucial criteria of something to be valid cognition? Is it enough to realize an object? Is that a valid cognition, according to these tenets? What do you think? Don? If you realize an object, is that a valid cognition? To actually have a realization?
No.
Why not?
It might have has to be non-conceptual.
Whoa. To realize something, it has to be non-conceptual? Pardon?
To have a valid mistaken. Non-controvertible, incontrovertible.
Is that right? Okay, Bonnie, get him on the right track here. Let's get him. Let's get down in the straight and narrow here. Pardon? Say a direct perception is non-conceptual, right? Then?
And you can realize an object that way.
Yeah, but he said that you had to realize things non-conceptually.
Oh.
That was the only way that you could realize them. Is that right? Because we said a valid cognition at least had to realize the objects. Don's claiming that in order to realize an object, you have to realize it with direct perception. No. You've grokked this, haven't you?
No, maybe 90% of it. Maybe there's the inferential realization. I think can happen.
You can know things you can realize things with conception. You can realize emptiness conceptually via a mental image. That can be a realization. And you can realize things with direct perception. So if you only could realize things with direct perception, there would be no valid way of knowing emptiness until you had a direct realization of it. There would be no prelude to that was a realization, right? Do you remember? The Buddhist position is that there are two ways that we can realize objects. That not just know them in a general way, not just believe them or have doubt about them or presume them, but two ways that we can remove superimpositions and actually realize something. One of them is through direct perception. One of them is via inferential cognition. We're going to be talking about today. You can realize something that way. Now, what Chris's question was, what is an example of a valid cognition? He used the Tibetan word. He's learning Tibetan. He said sema, right? He said, can you give an example of a sema? Maybe you thought he was talking about something else. Or in Sanskrit, what's that word? Remember? Pramana. And the way that we're using it here, that means a valid cognition. So there's another criterion for something to be pramana, besides realizing its object, or as Don and what's your name? Pat was saying, besides being incontrovertible with respect to the object, what else does the consciousness have to, what other quality does it have to have according to the Sautrantika tenets? Well, if it's incontrovertible, it doesn't have to be non-mistaken, because inferential cognition is mistaken, isn't it? In the sense of how mistaken is being used here. Mistaken means mistaken with respect to its appearing object. And all conceptions are mistaken with respect to their appearing objects for various reasons. The other quality we said for the Sautrantikas is that it has to be fresh or new, a new, incontrovertible knower. That was kind of the general definition of a valid cognizer, right? A tsema. And so I could say, if you said, what are examples? I could say there are two. There are direct valid cognizers which use direct perception, such as our eye consciousness. The first instant of seeing, what are these, daisies? Or no, these are what? These flowers. Come on, flowers. Come on, some kind of flower, right? The first instant of seeing that kind of flower is able to pull along the subsequent moments of that visual train, that visual consciousness. And so that first instant, according to these tenets, would be a valid direct perceiver. And say the first instant when you realize, say, impermanence, with a inferential cognizer, that first instant would also be a valid cognizer, because if you're realizing it with inferential cognition, if it becomes incontrovertible, then that would be a valid cognizer, if it's the first instant of that. The subsequent moments, we have to investigate whether they'd even be called inference or not. Maybe they're not actually inference.
George, are we talking about like the experience that we have when, dawn, on comes the light? I mean, that's my normal way of thinking of realizing something. Like, all this time I got it, didn't quite get it right, but...
Then suddenly, that's maybe something to do with it when you've suddenly understood something correctly, but that may still be conceptual most of the time, right? Would that necessarily be a direct perception? I mean, would that necessarily be an inferential cognizer? No, and actually to have an inferential cognizer, which is the only way that you can really realize something with the mind, is one in which, due to a perfect reason, you've eliminated wrong ideas about something. It might be in some circumstances, but that kind of aha experience, is that what we call them? Pardon? Epiphany. Maybe epiphany. Would it? Maybe an epiphany. That kind of experience where suddenly something dawns on you may just be eliminating certain misconceptions about something and getting at it correctly, but maybe not yet. I don't think that would necessarily be a valid cognizer. I think from there, when you refined that over time, sort of the approach of a valid cognizer is not as though 1 minute you don't know it at all, and then the next minute you know it. That would not be sort of the sign of having developed a valid cognizer. Even the moment before you have a valid cognizer, let's say an inferential cognizer, a conceptual mind that realizes something. Even the moment before, you're getting at it, you're getting closer and closer to it. But there might be something like that when things kind of click. It's somehow related. Let's go a little bit for Mr. Georgie.
Did I hear you incorrectly a moment ago? Did you say that the only
What
way
did I
the
make
mind
wrong?
can realize something is by inference?
No.
I thought I heard you say that.
Don said the only way that you can realize something is with direct perception.
Right, but I thought you might have said a minute ago. Maybe I heard you wrong.
No, I said the only way that you can realize something is basically via two things. Also subsequent cognition, but basically there's two ways by which you realize something: via direct perception, or via inference, or by their continuity, by subsequent cognition of either of them. Because there are two kinds of objects. There are manifest objects and there are hidden objects. Some of them are deeply hidden, but still, say manifest and hidden. Manifest objects we can realize with direct perception. Hidden objects we can realize with inference. Do you remember this? What's a hidden object?
Emptiness.
Emptiness is a hidden object because it doesn't appear to our consciousness directly. It doesn't appear to direct perception for the first time until we've realized it via inference, conceptually.
How do you define realize, though? Because if you realize emptiness through inference, that's different than the direct perception of emptiness, which you're also using the word realizing emptiness. So there has to be a different
So
definition.
to realize something means to be incontrovertible with respect to it. There's several aspects. One means to remove misconceptions about it and to be able to induce a certainty afterwards, what we call an ascertaining consciousness, that you realize that. It has to be strong. For instance, a consciousness to which an object appears but is not ascertained. Inattentive perception can't be a valid consciousness, even though, say, you were sitting there and something happened in front of you, but you were completely thinking about something else. Your mind was distracted to something else, either to one other sense or to your mental consciousness. You weren't paying sufficient attention to that, even though it appeared to your eye consciousness, let's say, and your eye consciousness did see it, but your mental consciousness was not paying sufficient attention later. That's the main way that we memorize, that we remember, that we can induce some certainty that we saw something. So that would not be a valid cognition, even though it's a direct perception. It's not. Is that a direct perception? In an object, a consciousness to an object to which an object appears but is not ascertained? Chris, is that a direct perception? Do you remember the divisions of direct perception? Yeah. Dan, do you remember? What did she say? Yogic? Mm-hmm. Those are the direct perceivers. Okay. How about sense direct perceivers? What are the divisions of sense direct perceivers? How many different kinds can there be? Now, I don't mean the 5. If we divide into 3 ways. Valid direct perceivers. Do you remember? Subsequent direct perceivers. And direct perceivers to which an object appears but is not ascertained. That sounds right? Okay, good. So, a direct perceiver, an inattentive perception is a direct perception. So, direct perceptions, it actually is perceiving the object, but it is not a valid kind of cognition because it can't even recall that you saw the object. It is a direct perception. It's unlike, say, seeing something erroneously, like having your little brother stick his thumb in your eye, or having some sickness, or being waking up in the morning or in the late afternoon in some cases, and being sort of groggy-eyed and not seeing things clearly as you're walking around. That wouldn't actually be a direct perception because you're not actually, you're influenced by some error in the sense consciousness, let's say, or in the basis. Okay, I'm not sure is it getting any clearer? You're beginning to remember? No?
Starting to get.
I'm not to get foggy again.
Too much in there to give an answer. It's study.
Okay, well, there were a lot of stuff that we studied, so you have to sort of, the gist of it is what, there are 2 things here. What constitutes a realization? What constitutes a valid cognition? So Chris's original question was, what constitutes a valid cognition? He said, can you give some examples of sema, of valid cognizers? And I said that basically there are only 2 kinds of valid cognizers. Sense direct perceivers that are valid cognizers and inferential cognizers. They realize their object, and instances of them that are fresh are valid because they have some kind of potency to pull other thoughts, subsequent cognizers along, like the engine of a train is able to pull the cars after it. Right? Then what constitutes a realization? That's another question. Some of you ask, what constitutes a realization? It has to be a consciousness which has eliminated misconceptions about something, either through direct perception or through inference. It's eliminated the misconceptions, it's gotten at the object, and it's conscious of that. It can induce a remembering consciousness that you perceived that. So inattentive perception is not a valid cognition, because it doesn't fulfill that kind of criterion. So to realize is different than to believe, even if you believe correctly. You know, like we were joking a couple of weeks ago about whether intuition is a realization or not. Sometimes we're saying, some people were saying, my intuition is a direct realization when it's right. But when my intuition is wrong,
Yes.
it's not a direct perception. Well, maybe it's just a kind of a guess or a feeling. Might sometimes have some element, but unless it actually eliminates superimpositions and you have an absolute certainty about that, it's able to induce certainty, it's not an actual realization. Even if we think we're certain, it may not actually be a realization, right? Because we can have a correct belief about something in which we feel we're absolutely certain about it. But we haven't actually realized that. So anyway, that gets a little bit clearer as we go along. Yes? Yeah, why not?
In this book, they're using the word in that list as subsequent apperception. When they talk about the 4 types of subsequent perception, and I was wondering, what is an apperception?
Apperception is what we're calling self-knower.
Oh, apperception is a self.
That's how in Geshe Repton's book, the translators of that, Steve Batchelor, I think mainly, translated self-knower as an apperception. Sometimes you see it translated as reflexive awareness. In Tibetan, rangrik, so knowing by oneself, knowing itself. So I don't know, I haven't looked up in the dictionary the word apperception. It must have some, is that what it means in English?
I've never seen the word.
Okay, did you look it up?
Yeah, I did.
And what did it say?
I don't remember exactly on this one.
But something.
It was something related to self-knowledge.
It says, as in being a part of something.
It means what?
As in being a part of something.
Apperception as in being a part of something.
Yeah.
You didn't get something about self-knowledge? The definition I saw definitely
I
had
didn't
something
say
about
that
knowing
anymore.
oneself or
I
something.
just got the feeling from it that part of an apprehension is your awareness, and that awareness was a part of that whole apprehension.
That's in reality. I was asking what the English word means, apperception.
Yeah, the dictionary I looked up said something like, as a part of something.
Well, that's obviously only part of the definition, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't just say apperception, the word perception is in it. Right, okay.
George?
Yeah, Chris.
So can I get back to it for just 1 second?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, so the flower, or the color and the shape appearing to your eye, that induces conceptualization of flower. The color and shape appearing to your eye,
Mm-hmm.
that is the power that pulls the rest of the train. That was the correct and valid perception?
We can even leave off the conception.
Okay.
We can leave off the conception. If later you're able to recall that you saw flower and the eye consciousness is not deceived about it, we would say that was a direct perception of flower. Let's say of what are these anyway? Sweet peas. Okay. That would be a direct apprehension, a direct perceiver of sweet pea, and direct perceivers can be either prime cognizers, subsequent cognizers, or perceivers, consciousnesses to which an object appears but is not ascertained. So in general, direct perceivers, unless you're not paying attention to them, generally they'll realize their object, it sounds, right? If they're actually direct perceivers. If they're not inattentive, they realize their object. And the first instant of that would be the I valid cognition. And that realizes the object. Okay. Okay. Subsequently, what goes on in your mind, judging about it and so forth, the conceptualization about it is another train of thought that's divorced from this. This is kind of like what's happening in the eye consciousness. I kind of think of as like the cameras that perceive something. If they're functioning correctly, it's not as though they're totally passive. They are knowing, that consciousness is knowing, but unless the mental consciousness pays attention to it, you don't recall that you saw that, and so that doesn't constitute a realization of it. You can't say that you had a valid cognition of a flower if you don't recall seeing it afterwards. Okay, anyway, that's a bit of review. So let's go a little bit further. Where did we get last time? On page 19, or were we that far? We talked about facsimiles of direct perceivers on the bottom of page 18. Do you remember that? I just started about that. So let's start with the definition again. Facsimile. What is a facsimile in general? A fax. We write it F-A-X, right? That's short for facsimile. A copy, something that looks like the original, something that looks like something else. So a facsimile. Representation. In Tibetan, the word here is actually tarnang, that which appears like. Tarpa means like, nang means appearing, tarnang, appearing like something. So a facsimile of a direct perceiver is something that appears to be a direct perceiver, but in reality is not. So a knower, the definition of a facsimile of a direct perceiver is a knower which is mistaken with regard to its appearing object. Now, why is that not a direct perceiver? What's the quality of a direct perceiver? No, direct perceiver doesn't have to be incontrovertible.
It's not mistaken.
It's not mistaken with respect to its appearing object. Here it says it's mistaken with regard to its appearing object. That means what's appearing to it is not being, there is some kind of mistake with regard to that. All conceptual consciousnesses are mistaken with respect to their appearing objects. Remember? All conceptual consciousness, because there are various reasons. Maybe Bonnie can give a discourse later because she's reading one of the books about Sautrantika tenets. There are several reasons why a conceptual consciousness is said to be mistaken with respect to the mental image. That's its appearing object. In one way, you can say, if I'm thinking about a vase, in one metaphysical way, you can say the vase is actually appearing to my mind, even though it's not here. Say it's the vase when I was a kid, or my baseball mitt when I was 10 years old or something. I don't know where it is now. Probably rotted away or something. Even if I think of that, you might say that that's appearing to my consciousness, but that's not called the appearing object of a conception. What's the appearing object to the conception? The main thing that's appearing to it? The meaning generality, or we could say the mental image. That's how we're knowing that object. So we're knowing the object via a mental image, and we're mistaken with respect to that. So all conceptual consciousnesses are mistaken with respect to their appearing object, because in one sense, the appearance of the mental image and the appearance of the object are mixed, and we can't differentiate one from the other. In a sense, that's how the higher tenets say all of our sense perceptions are. When I perceive Marcy, right? When I perceive Marcy, there are two appearances appearing to my consciousness, even to my sense consciousness. The appearance of the conventionally existent Marcy and the appearance of a truly existent Marcy, as though existing from its own side. And those two are, inseparably mixed. I can't differentiate between the two. Everything appears to be truly existent, and when we do validly know them, we do have an understanding of their conventional existence. We know that Marcy is the lady that's named to this particular set of aggregates. It sounds a bit impersonal, doesn't it? These piles, these 5 piles. It sounds a bit. Okay. So this sounds a little, to me, the Sautrantika explanation of how we're mistaken with respect to the mental image. One of the reasons we're mistaken is because the two images are mistaken for one another. You can't separate the two, the appearance of the mental object, the mental image, and the appearance of the actual object. It seems like the mental image is the appearance of the mental image is the object, the appearance of the object, but it's not. In the same way, when I look at Maureen, I call her Mo because when I knew a girl when I was teaching in Beirut called Maureen, everyone called her Mo. Is that okay to call you Mo? Mo. My nickname when I was a kid was Ro. I mean, my nickname was Mo, rather. When our friend started out, one of my friends' name was Dennis McClure. So, of course, he was Mac, right? And then our other friend was named Roger, and he was Ro. So I had to have something. So I became Mo because I tried to figure out something. My initials, George John Churinoff Jr., Esquire III, Master of Everything, GJCJETT, MOE. So I took the name Mo. So that's what I liked. That's not the same as Mo, like M-O, but that's kind of, I think it was Maureen, not M-O-E. Anyway. So the Prasangikas would say, even with it, we leave aside this thing about a mistaken, a knower which is mistaken with regard to its appearing object. Here in Prasangika it said that all objects appear to sense consciousnesses and to our ordinary consciousness as truly existent. In fact, the appearance of the conventional object, like the conventionally existent Maureen, does appear to my sense consciousness, as does the appearance of a truly existent Maureen. And those two appearances are mixed such that I cannot separate one from the other, even to conception. Only when I'm understanding emptiness can I eliminate the appearance of a truly existent object. So there's a little bit similarity here when we talk about how a facsimile of a direct perceiver is a knower to which is mistaken with regard to its appearing object. According to this definition, all conceptions are called facsimiles of direct perceivers. It might be that to many of them something appears very clearly, but it is mixed with a conception. It is mixed with a mental image. There are some kinds of non-conceptual facsimiles of direct perceivers. Those would be things that are mistaken with respect, like looking at the sparkler on the 4th of July, that's being twirled around in the figure 8 or whatever. It looks like there's an 8 in space, but that sense consciousness is mistaken with respect to its appearing object. There's not an actual fiery 8 there. It's just because that succession of movement is so fast that our eye merges it all together, right? Anyway, we'll talk about this in a second. So here it says that there are 7 divisions of facsimiles of direct perceivers. Actually, 6 of them are conceptual minds, because all conceptual minds are going to be mistaken with respect to their appearing object, because they're mistaken with respect to the mental image. And one of them is non-conceptual, which is the kind of thing we were just talking about a second, that has some kind of mistake, either in the sense or in the object itself or something like that, in the way it's being perceived. So there are mistaken conceptions, conventional conceptions, inferential conceptions, conceptions arisen from inference, memory conceptions, and wishing conceptions. These are the 6 kinds of conceptions. So this comes from the classic literature. So you might say, well, what do I have to know this for? Oh, so to be able to know, to follow these great pundits when they're talking. They all studied this kind of stuff before. So it can make our mind a little more clear about these things. So what is here a mistaken conception? That would be just like a wrong idea, thinking that sound is permanent. That conception. That's a mistaken conception. Actually, it's a mistaken consciousness anyway, right? It's mistaken when there's the appearing object, but it's also mistaken, it's controvertible, it's wrong. It's just a mistaken conception. It's just, excuse me, sound is not permanent. Is that right? Is sound permanent?
No.
Is it Michael? Is sound permanent? No, sound's not permanent. It's changing the sound. Otherwise, when I said something, it would continually exist. But sound, we know, is waves that move through space and so forth, and that sound is not permanent. So a conception that thought sound was permanent is here given as an example of a mistaken conception. An inferential cognizer, the second one, conventional conceptions. An inferential cognizer which realizes sound to be impermanent. So this is actually what we call a correct inference. An inferential cognizer which realizes sound to be impermanent. That's called a conventional conception. Here it doesn't define why it's called a conventional conception. I think in some texts it seems like, I think maybe in Geshe-Raptin's text or in one of the others, it kind of implies that it is called that because it's knowing conventional phenomena. According to Sautrantika, well, let's see. Should I say that? Am I sorry? I'm not sure. I better keep quiet.
Can we say with that example then, the figure 8 fire thing is a conventional conception that's mistaken?
Well, here, the meaning of a conventional conception is, or an illustration of it is, an inferential cognizer which realizes sound to be impermanent.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But in that case, aren't you inferring that motion is one singular piece of fire that's moving around?
Is that an inferential cognition?
That's what I was asking.
It wouldn't be an inferential cognition because an inferential cognition, we'll learn later, is something that actually realizes its object. And if it's wrong, it's not an inferential cognition. It might be a conception, it's somehow faulty. An inferential cognition is something that has all the elements. It realizes the subject and the relationship between the subject and the predicate and the sign. You know, on the smoky pass, fire exists because smoke exists. It realizes that smoke exists, that fire exists on the smoky pass. That would be an example. Or it realizes that the person is empty for some sign. It realizes that. Here, mistakenly thinking that that is a figure, that there is an 8 of light out there would not be an inferential cognizer because it doesn't realize its object. It's wrong. Yeah. Let's go through this a little bit further. So then the third one was called what? The third example of a conceptual mistaken facsimile of direct perception was a thought which is a mind apprehending a sign. Okay, so this comes in more detail as we go along. A mind apprehending a sign is a consciousness which is a cause of developing an inference. It's one of the kind of establishing cognitions to have an inference, like to realize that sound is a product. Say, for instance, in the proof that sound is impermanent, because it's a product of causes and conditions. One of the establishing cognitions, or the in this case, a mind apprehending a sign would be in the continuum of a person who's just about to realize that sound is impermanent, the understanding that sound is a product and that all products are impermanent. Both of those would be minds apprehending a sign. Now those are not actually inferences. Those are kind of those are causes of an inferential cognition.
How does that affect someone?
Because it's mistaken with, it's a conceptual mind, and all of these are conceptual ones. So they're all mistaken with respect to their appearing object, the mental image. For instance, the one right before this, the inferential cognizer, you could say, well, how is that mistaken? That realized that sound is impermanent. How could that be mistaken? Because the definition here was something mistaken with regard to its appearing object. So even the conception that realizes that sound is impermanent is mistaken because it's realizing it, that inference is realizing it via a mental image, because it's a conceptual mind. It's not a direct perception of impermanence. It's knowing impermanence like some kind of mental image has been built up, which is factually correct, say, according with the fact, factually concordant. That mental image, which eliminates all misconceptions about it, and leads one, if one were to meditate on that, and that mental image were to slowly dissolve and to become transparent over time because of familiarity, one would actually realize the object directly. But here you're realizing it via a mental image, and the object impermanence that you're knowing by its mental image, that process is one that's mistaken, because you're mistaken with respect to the appearing object. The appearing object, the mental image of impermanence, appears to be, to a certain degree, impermanence itself.
So that's the mistake.
That's the mistake. In all conceptions, all conceptions are mistaken with respect to their appearing objects. The first one here, we're called a mistaken conception, is using the word mistaken twice, in a sense, kind of like a double whammy. Not only is it mistaken with respect to its appearing object, but it's thinking its appearing object is that sound is permanent. You know? Or that I've got $1 million. You know, George has got $1 million. That's a mistaken, let me tell you, it's a mistaken conception. So it's mistaken. Of course, it's being a conception, it's mistaken because it's knowing, it's thinking about its object, it's perceiving its object via a mental image, which it takes to be the object itself. So it's mistaken that way. But here it's called a mistaken conception, or just a wrong consciousness, because it's the actual object that it's trying to realize is wrong. It doesn't actually exist that way. Okay? Are we making any headway? Chris, are you lost?
No, I'm all right.
Okay, good. That kind of interesting look on your face. Okay. Then, so signs apprehending, thoughts, minds apprehending a sign, there's actually a whole section here coming up. What are signs apprehending, minds apprehending a sign? Fourth example of a conceptual facsimile of direct perception. A thought which arises after an inferential cognizer. So you see, we've got what comes before the thought apprehending the sign. That's the third one. The second one, the inference itself, and then the thought that comes after it. That's also a facsimile of direct perception, because it's still a conceptual mind. It could be a remembering consciousness or a subsequent cognition of that inferential cognizer. And fifth, a thought which today remembers an object of the past. A little bit different than the previous one. Here it can be anything, you know, remembering something, my baseball mitt, or, you know, my graduation, or something, you know, of the past. That is also a conceptual mind. Remembering consciousnesses might appear to be very clear in some cases, but they're said to be facsimiles of direct perceptions because they are mistaken with respect to their appearing objects. And then sixth, Conceptual one, a thought which today wishes for an object of the future. So future-oriented thought. What else do we call it? Daydreaming might be. Thinking about something in the future. Might be some kind of daydreams. That also is a conceptual thought, so it's mistaken with respect to its appearing object. There are many others, but these are the main ones. Then there are non-conceptual facsimiles of direct perceivers. So there are 4, and we'll talk about these. I'll just give the names. We'll have a little break. There are 4. One in which there's a cause of error. All of them have some cause of error. One, the cause of error exists in the basis. In this case, let's say in the sense base, the faculty. One in the abode, as in this example, for instance, when you're in a train, or if you're in a boat and it looks like other things are moving next to you, and you're actually moving. It looks like the other things, the shore is suddenly going, how did the dock suddenly moving away, because the boat is just going very slowly. And when the mistake exists in the object, that was like the 4th of July, here it says a firebrand, and the 4th is a mistake in the immediately preceding condition. The cause of error is that when you're incredibly angry, and that causes blood to go to the sense base and can cause some kind of color to appear in what you see. Okay, so let's take a little break. You deserve it. Carrie asks about the 3, what did you say? The 3 empty spheres. We say the 3 spheres of emptiness. I didn't say the 3 empty spheres. You could say that. 3 empty spheres. So there's different ways of talking about this. When we talk about dedication, the way to understand it is that the merits being dedicated are empty of being truly existent, empty of being inherently existent. The object being dedicated to, let's say, our own attainment of enlightenment, or the benefit of all sentient beings, or our continual development, well, all the various things that you can dedicate many different objects, right? All of the object being dedicated to is empty of true existence. And the act of dedication, which is linking the merits, wishing that these merits ripen in that way, that action is also empty of inherent existence. And whatever action that we do, whatever action the Bodhisattvas do, let's say the perfections of perfection of generosity and ethical behavior, morality and patience and enthusiastic perseverance, concentration, wisdom, all have to be conjoined with the perfection of wisdom. So one understands, in the act of giving, one thinks the agent, the action of giving, and the recipient are all empty of true existence. So while doing that, that's one way of conjoining the perfection of the practice of charity, the practice of perfection of charity with the perfection of wisdom, understanding those 3 spheres. All of the actions that we do will have 3 different kinds of things like that: an agent, an action, and a recipient, let's say, in certain cases. Sometimes you divide up in different ways. Okay. Yeah, we'll never finish this text this way, but anyway, that's good. That's good. It's fun.
So the meaning generality is it's generally characterized, and is that why it's mistaken, because the appearing object is not generally characterized?
Well, you can have a conception about space, right? Space is a permanent phenomenon. Here in this in these tenets, it's called a generally characterized phenomena. It means it's a kind of, in a sense, a kind of a generality. For these tenets, generally characterized phenomena, as opposed to specifically characterized phenomena, generally characterized phenomena are permanent, right?
Yeah.
Certain things that are called generally characterized, one of the synonyms of permanent phenomena. Specifically characterized phenomena like wristwatch or self or mind or whatever, all the impermanent phenomena, they're called specifically characterized. So you can have a conception of space, right? So why is that mistaken? Because space is also permanent. You were saying maybe it's mistaken because the object you're thinking about, like your mother's face, is impermanent, but the mental image is permanent. Actually, they're two different things. Your mother's face and the mental image, right? They're not the same. That's the reason they're mistaken. But indeed, in that case, they're different. But what about space? Space is permanent and the mental image is permanent. But that's still a mistake. A conception of space is still a mental image, is still mistaken consciousness. Mistaken with respect. That's just an exception. Okay. Okay. Right. Right, good. I'm glad you put up your hand like that. That was good. Don't make fun of me. Janet Gatsu said. Is it Janet Gatsu? Oh, Jankya Robo Dorje. Yeah, but also some of the lamas say that this kind of, if you check about the conception of permanent phenomena, the conception of course, in the upper schools, we say that you can actually realize them eventually. Let's say conception of emptiness or conception of selflessness, which are the objects themselves are permanent, or conception of cessation. The mental image is permanent, and the object that's being known is permanent, but the mental image is not necessarily the object being known. It's just a mental image that you're developing of that. If you have a conception of space, it doesn't mean you're actually perceiving or conceptually realizing space. It might be something like a correct belief or something like that. If it's based on inference, the mental image is factually concordant according to the object that you're knowing. It accords with that. There's not a mistake. That the mental image of space is permanent, and the space itself that it's the mental image of is also permanent. Okay, one more question, then we will continue. Otherwise, even this short section, we're going to finish. Yeah.
And because I'm a little out of context, but
Okay.
if the dedication and the object being dedicated and the very act of it is emptiness, how is the outcome of the
consciousnesses. Are those both non-conceptual?
From among the two, non-conceptual facsimiles of direct perception, which are mental consciousnesses, and those which are sense consciousnesses, an illustration of the first, a mental one, was discussed above,
What's that
was explained
referring
above. What was that? What's the example of that? The mental.
to? A mental consciousness that's a non-conceptual facsimile?
Mhm.
I don't know.
With regard to the second, non-conceptual facsimiles of direct perceivers, which are sense consciousnesses, there are, from above the two, non-conceptual facsimiles of a direct perceiver, which are mental consciousnesses, and which are sense consciousnesses, an illustration of the first was explained above.
Wouldn't that be the second one? The inferential cognition?
But those are
That's not it.
different.
That's not non-conceptual. That's conceptual. Hmm? So there's some. I think there's several things like this in the texts. Sometimes they say, "I explain," like Lama Tsongkhapa says sometimes, "I explained earlier, this," and then you look through the text and you can't find, And so there are many kinds. So you have to look. Maybe next time you take a look somewhere in the beginning of this text. When we're talking about mental, well, you have to find what's going to be the context. It's going to be talking about mental direct perceivers, right?
Right. Well, I remember that because after you have a direct sense perception, then you have just a split second of a mental direct perception before it turns into
Okay, now
perception.
that mental direct perception, would that be mistaken with respect to its appearing object? No, it's an inattentive perception. Inattentive perceptions are not necessarily mistaken with their appearing objects. But, for instance, some dream consciousnesses, we'd have to check what Purvachok meant. Some dream consciousnesses that are, like Lama Tsongkhapa said, are direct perceivers, they are mistaken with respect to their appearing objects. Anyway, you have to check. Put a circle around that and see if you can find what he's talking about there. With regard to the second, non-conceptual facsimiles of direct perceivers, which are sense consciousnesses, there are four in which the cause of error exists in the basis. So what's the example of that? The cause of error existing in the basis is, for example, an eye impaired by an obscuring disease. For a sense consciousness which sees one moon as two is produced in dependence upon that. It can be a disease or it can be something, that doesn't have to be a disease. It can be some kind of, for instance, there's some kinds of, I can't remember the name, the scientific name or Latin name, some kind of disease where it looks like you're seeing falling hairs. Tibetan calls that rabrip. And that would be some kind of source of error existing in the basis, meaning the sense faculty, because we're talking about sense direct perceivers, right? What would be another one? Or let me be. How about what we called it last time? Color blindness. Would that be that? There'd be some error existing. You would be a mistaken consciousness. You think the red light is green, and you go through and you crash, or you get the ticket. You say, "It's green. Excuse me." The policeman looks at your license and sees that you're colorblind, and that would explain the cause of error existing in the basis. The second one is a cause of error existing in the abode or the place. So this is, for example, sitting in a boat, and when let's say for an eye consciousness, which sees the trees as moving when the boat is moving. Sometimes when you're on the train, and like I was in the station in San Francisco, and you're waiting for the train to move, and you're not quite sure, because when they first start, sometimes there's a jerk, but sometimes it starts very, very slowly. So I'm sitting in the train and I look out and I see another train. Looks like it's standing, that we're moving forward. And I think, oh, we're moving finally. And then You know, that we're still, I look out the other window and we're not moving. Then I look and I say, well, actually, what I thought we were moving because the other train was moving. The other train was coming in slowly. Okay? So just the opposite can happen. You can be moving, and it looks like other things are moving with respect to you. So that sense consciousness that senses the other things are. So sort of modern science would say you could have a lot of debate about this, because Einstein always talked about the theory of relativity, right? There's no absolute state of inertial state in which everything else that is at rest and everything else is moving with respect to it. Everything is relative. So even when you see other things moving, you are moving with respect to one another. But what the sense consciousness perceives often, there's an error thinking the other thing is moving in an absolute way. Like I thought our train was moving, or when you're actually moving slowly and you think other things are moving away from you. That would be the error in that case, in the abode. Does that make sense? You can figure that out. That's not hard to understand. Then the error in the object. For example, a quickly whirling firebrand. Take a big, torch. For sense consciousness, which sees a firebrand as a wheel is produced in dependence upon that. So there's no wheel of fire outside there. And the fourth, when the cause of error exists in the immediately preceding condition, for example, a mind disturbed by hatred, because a sense consciousness which sees the earth as red is produced in dependence upon that. Do you believe that? The implication being that when you're very angry, it affects the flow of blood. When the blood pressure gets high and blood can come in the eye, and it can affect the consciousness, the eye consciousness, so that what appears to be red outside. Non-conceptual wrong consciousness. Non-conceptual wrong consciousness. Here, wrong is his third word, not just mistaken or controvertible. Wrong means sort of like, what's another one? Distorted. Non-conceptual distorted consciousness, non-conceptual facsimile of direct perceiver, and consciousness which has a clear appearance of a non-existent are synonymous. The clear appearance of a non-existent. So the clear appearance of a firebrand, or the trees moving, when actually the trees are not moving. Their roots haven't sort of sprouted feet and are walking along or something. So then now we get to the definition of an inferential prime cognizer. What's the kind of condition? What's the kind of the sequence here? We were talking about prime cognizers or valid cognizers at the beginning, and then we had to give the definitions of direct perceivers first. Then we gave the definitions of direct prime cognizers. Now we're giving the definition of an inferential prime cognizer. That's the second kind of prime cognizer. Prime cognizer, another way that we're translating it? Valid cognizer, right? It's pramana, or as Chris called it at the beginning, tsema in Tibetan, or pramana. So the definition of an inferential prime cognizer is a new. So it has to be, well, of course, a prime cognizer has to be new. A new, incontrovertible, determinative knower that is directly produced in dependence on a correct sign, which is its basis. Determinative knower. Is this the first time we came across that phrase? Is it? Well, maybe in our reading here. What's a determinative knower? Does anyone know? So a determinative knower is another sort of synonym of conceptual mind. Conceptual knower. Determinative knower, so it's determining or weighing its object. It's not knowing it directly. incontrovertible, you could say an incontrovertible conceptual mind. Here it's using determinative knower because it's actually more powerful way of saying, I think, which is directly produced in dependence upon a correct sign, which is its basis. Correct sign means a correct reasoning. Here, the sign doesn't mean just like when we talk about the syllogism, there is the subject, the predicate, and the sign. Here, the word sign can mean that whole syllogism, correct sign or correct reason. Okay, does that make any sense to you? Yeah, this is actually the definition of an inferential prime cognizer. Did we have the definition of an inferential cognition before? Not talking about prime. We didn't talk about inferential. We've alluded to it, but this is the first time it's coming, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So we haven't yet talked about a non-prime inferential cognizer. This is just a prime inferential cognition or an inferential prime cognizer. Yeah.
What on the determinative knower you said there was, what was the synonym used?
It means a conceptual mind, a conceptual consciousness, right? It's determining it, you could say. Let's see how this text doesn't have a glossary in it. I think she has a glossary here because she's using the same. The same author translated this text, translated Lati Roche's text here, and she used the same terminology for the most part. So a determinative knower is Shenrik, Shenba, Z-H-E-N. Shen means to hold. So Shenrik, a determinative knower, is something which is, you could say, in a sense, it's imagining. It's not actually real. It's not actually directly realizing something. It's knowing it via imagination, you might say. Let's go a little bit further, because we're almost out of time. Oh no, we've got some time. Half an hour. When inferential prime cognizers are divided, so basically we're talking about inference for the first time, inferential cognition, okay? The word nu makes it a prime cognizer, because an inferential cognizer has to be incontrovertible, I think. An inferential cognizer by definition. And when inferential prime cognizers are divided, we'll say this is interesting. There are three. Inferential cognizers by the power of the fact. Inferential cognizers through renown. And inferential cognizers through belief. Or you could say through, confidence. Belief sounds too weak here. It's not the same word as, well, maybe iche, belief. Okay. So an illustration of the first. These are the three kinds of inferential cognizers. Usually an inferential, all of them, you have to depend upon a correct reasoning, but they use correct reasoning in different ways. An illustration of the first, an inferential cognizer, an inferential prime cognizer, by the power of the fact, is one in which an inferential is such as an inferential cognizer that realizes that sound is impermanent through the sign of it being a product. In other words, sound is impermanent because it is a product. Or on a smoky path, fire exists because smoke exists. All phenomena are empty of true existence because they are dependent arisings. All of those usual kinds of statements that can give rise to inferential cognitions. The statements themselves are not called the inferential cognizers. A cognizer or a cognition is an actual state of mind, right? These statements are what that mind is realizing incontrovertibly. Okay? So the statement is not the inferential cognizer.
Whenever I see the word sign, can I substitute the word reason for it?
Whenever you see the word sign, not always, but in this case you might be able. Here, through the sign of being a product, that it means the sign in the syllogism. Because when you have a syllogism, which can be called a sign or reason, sometimes they're translating the reasoning to be sign. So sound, the subject, is impermanent. Is impermanent is the predicate. Okay? Because it is a product. Being a product is the sign, the tak, the logical mark, you could translate, in that syllogism. So in this case, sign is the correct word. So now there are other kinds of you might think, for instance, there were sense direct perceiver, sense prime cognizers and inferential prime cognizers. Basically two kinds of prime cognizers, right? Direct prime cognizers, did I say sense? Direct prime cognizers and inferential prime cognizers. You might think there were two. But here it says there's three kinds of inferential prime cognizers: by the power of the fact, by renown, through belief or confidence. Those all are inferential prime cognizers. They all are, in a sense, related with the first one. They all depend upon a correct reasoning like that, but there's slight difference between them. An illustration of a prime cognizer, inferential prime cognizer, through renown is an inferential cognizer which realizes that it is suitable to express the rabbit possessor by the term moon, through the sign of it existing among objects of thought. Sounds like we did this before. We alluded to this, right?
No, rabbit possessor was used as an example someplace else.
Okay.
Somebody didn't understand.
Okay. What is the rabbit possessor? That's a poetic name in Sanskrit. There are many kinds of names for the moon in Sanskrit, and many kinds of names for the sun and the moon. Just like in Italian, there's many names for love, right? In French? Okay, French. Maybe in French. And in the Aboriginal, the Indians that live in the Indonesian rainforest, there are many names for different shades of green. You know that, right? The Eskimos, there's many names for shades of white. Kind of, that different names, because to them it looks quite different. To us it's white, To us it's green, but in the forest, in the emerald forest, the greens look differently. So to the Indians, there were many names for the moon. It's like the French, there's many names for love, as you said. Okay? I thought it was the Italians who were the lovers. Oh, that's heaven. And the Italians are the lovers. I'll tell you that story sometime. Heaven and hell. So here it's saying, it's just giving a synonym of the moon. It's saying a consciousness, an inferential cognizer that realizes that it is suitable, it's okay to call the rabbit possessor, that thing up there that looks like it has the rabbit, we can call it moon, or what's the word for moon in Sanskrit? Chandra, like Chandra Kirti, or Chandra Das, or Chandra means moon, right? Chandra Kirti means famous moon. Renowned moon. So it's suitable to call the rabbit possessor, that thing up in the sky, by the term Chandra, by the sign. What's the sign? Because it exists among objects of thought. In other words, anything which is an object of thought can be called anything. There are no names that inherently exist in objects. Woo. Okay? Then the third kind of inferential cognizer through belief is, an illustration of that is an inferential cognizer that realizes that the scriptural citation, here says the scripture, it sounds like a book. The scripture here means citation from a scripture, from giving resources. Or say, due to giving, one obtains resources. Due to ethics, one receives happy migrations. It's a inferential cognizer that realizes that scriptural citation is incontrovertible, is correct, is unambiguous and absolutely correct with respect to the meaning indicated due to the sign of it being a scripture free from the three contradictions. So one has to check what those three contradictions are. I'm not sure if they come right here or if it comes in another place in the text. Certainly you can find in Lati Rinpoche's book. So, for instance, the Buddha said, due to giving, you will obtain resources. Usually, like we joke many times, the rich people think, due to not giving, you amass fortune, right? But the Christ and the Buddha said you receive by giving, right? You create the karmic cause for that. So this is talking about one of the things about karma, this citation. This is a famous citation that Nagarjuna uses in his texts, and this particular citation, from giving, due to giving, resources, due to ethics, happiness, meaning happy migration, a higher rebirth. So those are things, the particular events that you produce, the particular giving that you give, the particular act of charity that you produce, you can't logically, by the power of the fact or by the power of renown, know that it will bring about a exact particular result in the future. Right? You don't know if if you give money to LMB now that in the future you will be born in this world with that amount of resources or something. That connection is very, very deeply hidden. So the inferential cognizer through renown, through the power of belief, means belief in a valid person who predicted that. And you have to check, first of all, you have to verify that that person is a valid person, like the Buddha. And then you have to check their scriptures, because sometimes the Buddha said things that for particular reasons. What do we call it? Ulterior motive? You say an ulterior motive? Not like sneaky, like, oh, George, you brought me this present for an ulterior motive, You wanted me to lend you some money, or you wanted to borrow my car, so you brought me this, cake or something like that. That's not what's meant here by ulterior motive. The Buddha may have had ulterior motives in saying that there was a self, because in some circumstances, to tell some people there was no self, they would be completely confused. So in some scriptures, he said there was a self. Some of the scriptures that are the basis for the Hinayana teachings, it seemed like he said that when a person died, there was nothing that can, then the person just arose somewhere else. He didn't talk about the intermediate state, but he may have an ulterior motive for doing that. In other scriptures, he talked about the bardo, the intermediate state between one death and another rebirth and so forth. So the third kind of reasoning, third kind of inferential cognition, is one that knows deeply hidden phenomena not by the power of the fact. You can't know deeply hidden phenomena by the power of the fact. You can know hidden phenomena by the power of the fact, right, Dana? The example you gave before of hidden phenomena such as emptiness or subtle impermanence, you can realize those with inferential cognizer on the basis of the fact, by the power of the fact. That is, sound is impermanent because it's a product. Or empty, all phenomena are empty of true existence because they're dependent arisings or something like that. But deeply hidden phenomena, there's no way that you can logically prove them. Due to Chris giving L&B his mother's printer, that in the future life he is going, that world system at that time, he is going to have numberless free flyers, printed flyers arrive at his door or something like that, or everything he wants printed will suddenly appear that way. We can't logically, by the power of the fact, deduce that. How could we deduce that? How could we infer that if the Buddha, a perfect being, predicted that, and we were to ascertain that he was a pramana, a valid person? Because pramana doesn't mean only valid cognition, it can mean a valid person. And that his scriptural prediction was free of three contradictions, or is purified in three ways. So it doesn't contradict the power of the fact and so forth. Anyway, we'll go through that a little bit later. Let's just go a little bit further. An inferential cognizer through renown is necessarily an inferential cognizer by the power of the fact. The second one is actually part of the first. It's a particular variation of it, in which the sign is that the object exists among objects of thought. Remember for the second one, because the sign, the moon exists among objects of thought. So that actually is something by the power of, that kind of inferential cognizer is actually one through the power of the fact, or the power of, say, ngutup, by actuality. Also, whatever is a direct perceiver, and probably this should have a little space here, now I was talking about something else. Whatever is a direct perceiver is not necessarily a direct prime cognizer. Why not?
Not fresh.
It's not fresh because, it says here, a direct prime cognizer, because the second moment of a sense direct perceiver apprehending a form is not a prime cognizer. Well, isn't a inattentive direct, isn't there such a division of direct perceivers as consciousness to which an object appears but is not ascertained? Isn't that one of the divisions of direct perceiver? That also would be not a prime cognizer, right? Neither of those divisions. Remember, there were three divisions of direct perceivers: prime cognizers, subsequent cognizers, and consciousnesses to which an object appears but is not ascertained. So neither of those second two are prime cognizers. Here it says that follows that a subsequent cognizer, the second moment of a sense direct perceiver, is not a prime cognizer. Why? That follows because the second moment of a sense direct perceiver apprehending a form and the second moment of an inferential cognizer which realizes that sound is impermanent, both of them are subsequent cognizers. So they're, according to our earlier divisions, prime cognizer was, if something was a subsequent cognizer, it was not a prime cognizer. Do you remember? We said before, because they made fun of the Prasangikas, they said, some people think that the second moment realizing something is still a prime cognizer. How absurd. Because that's a subsequent cognizer. According to Sautrantika, if something is a prime cognizer, it is not a subsequent cognition. It's only that first instant that realizes it freshly That's a prime cognizer. This follows. Did I say that already? This is because Dharmottara is some Indian Buddhist who wrote a book called The Correct. This is because Dharmottara's text called The Correct says, the first moment of a direct perceiver and the first moment of an inferential cognizer are prime cognizers. But subsequent moments in the continuums, I think it should be continua, of those, because of being non-different in establishment and abiding, have forsaken being prime cognizers. So what he's saying is, this is the Sautrantika tenet. They're using a Sautrantika pundit to verify this. Their understanding, we said before, was that the first instant of a train of consciousness, whether it be conceptual in inference or whether it be perceptual, such as a sense-direct perceiver, the first instant that pulls the train along, like the engine, is a prime cognizer. It's fresh, it's knowing it by its own power. But the subsequent moments to that, in that same train of thought or perception, are their vibrancy, their arisal is due to that first instance existent, that first instance kind of pulling them along. That's kind of the meaning. I think you can check into this more in these texts. Furthermore, when prime cognizers are terminologically divided, there are two, inference for oneself and inference for another. What does that mean, terminologically divided, Clayton? You're hiding behind the chair there. Where were you?
You have to think about context again.
Terminologically divided. Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I had it.
Did you read? No one read ahead.
If the terminology is similar.
This sounds like how many angels can sit on the tip of a pin? Is that what you're thinking? No, come on. Slice of bologna thinner? No, it's not bologna. Excuse me.
They're similar, but they're not synonymous.
Terminological divisions, the implication here, the way that they're using it means it sounds like it's a division, but it's not a real division. Terminological division means it's like, for instance, facsimiles of direct perception. Sounds like that's actually that's a terminological division of, we could say, when direct perceivers are divided terminologically, there are also facsimiles of direct perceivers. Are those direct perceivers? No, neither. How about the non-conceptual facsimile of direct perception? Is that a direct perceiver? No, it's a mistaken consciousness, right? So that's kind of the meaning of a terminological division. Some of them may be, some of them may not be actual divisions. So furthermore, when prime cognizers are terminologically divided, there are two: inference for oneself and inference for another. The first is an actual division, is the only kind of inferential prime cognizer. Okay? Inference for oneself means an inferential cognizer. It says the first, inference for oneself, and inferential cognizer are synonymous. How we doing? 7 minutes. The second, inference for another, and correct proof statement are synonymous. So a correct proof statement is not an inferential cognizer. What is a correct proof statement? Anyone know? Chris, have you studied before?
No, but would that be like a logical proof that you're giving to someone else so that they can...
Yeah, it's called inference for another, but it's not an actual inferential cognizer. It's called that because it can, if properly done, it can induce in the other person's consciousness a inference. So proof statements are what are given when, say for instance, in the process of trying to lead a person to an inference, what you do first of all is if they are holding a wrong understanding, like there's no such thing as past and future lives. Excuse me, I've never seen them. My 20th century gurus, the scientists in the laboratories, they can't perceive them. Therefore, they don't exist. So if someone has an idea like that, you first have to propose to them a consequence of an absurd consequence of their position that can cause their mind to be unsure of what they were holding so strongly onto. If you simply were to show them an inference, a correct sign that explained why past and future lives did exist, and even for us, that sign may not be very convincing at first. If you were to just provide that to them, they wouldn't even attend to it. They wouldn't even pay attention to it very clearly because they're still holding to their wrong idea. So first you in the sequence of events, especially in the Sautrantika logic, Chittamatra and others, you first propose a consequence, an absurd consequence to them. That's why a lot of the debates are phrased in terms of consequence. It follows that, according to you, according to you, Don, there's only one kind of valid cognizer, only direct valid cognizers. Because according to you, it follows that inferential cognizers are not valid cognizers. Kind of what we said before. Remember, we were saying that only direct perceivers realize their objects or something. So then the second step is to develop, to propose proof statements to them that establish in their minds the establishing cognitions, the mind apprehending a sign. We can bring that about. Here, I'll read you a little. This is on page 53 or 33. What does it say? 83, sorry. Okay, read it in the light here. In Lati Rinpoche's text. There's also a terminological, twofold division of inferential cognizers into inference for oneself and for another, inference for another. That for oneself, inference for oneself, refers to inference as has been set forth above in the threefold division by way of entity. There was by the inference, by the power of the fact, by renown, and by belief. Is correct inference. That for another refers to a proof statement, which is posited before a statement of a reason. First, a consequence is stated, then a proof statement, then a correct reasoning. Here it says, then a reason. This division is terminological, that is, the inference for another is just a terminological division, because whatever is an inference must be a consciousness. But inference for another, being a proof statement, is sound. It's just an utterance, is matter, is not consciousness. Thus, whatever is an actual inference is necessarily an inference for oneself. So a proof statement can cause an inference in the person that you're providing it to when they think about it, then it becomes an inference for themselves, an actual inferential cognizer. Does that make sense? You following a little bit? The use of inference for another is as follows. In order to overcome the wrong view of, for example, a Samkhya, this is a particular practitioner of the Vedic tradition, who asserts that sound is permanent, one would first state a consequence. It follows that the subject's sound is not a product because of being permanent. Is that true?
No.
It's not true. It's an absurd consequence. They believe that sound is permanent. Okay? So you throw this to them. They have to think about this. Follows that the subject's sound is not a product because of being permanent. Actually, they accept that sound is a product, but they also accept that it's permanent. So when you throw this at them as a logical thing, then that confounds them, and you're preparing them for the eventual presentation of a proof statement where you establish the correct, to establish the positive pervasion, for instance, one would state later, The subject product is impermanent because of being momentary. Or you would say, to establish the property of the subject sound is a product, that's the third thing, because of being a created thing. So those are called proof statements that are establishing in the person's mind various conditions to realize it. How do you feel? Are you grokking this? Yeah? Not so bad. Okay, slowly. Let's just dedicate quickly, but profoundly, the merit that we created. Especially the merit, what merit did we create? The merit of listening to the teachings with a good intention, thinking that this would bring about the causes of our being able to overcome our own afflictions by understanding emptiness, reading the scriptures and so forth. This was the intention. We listened to the teachings so that we could overcome our faults, to not be of harm to others, to benefit others, to quickly attain enlightenment for their welfare. So we've created some virtue in listening to the teachings tonight. Due to this virtue, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha. Not just may it ripen in the future in some pleasure, but may I become an enlightened being, a Buddha, for the welfare of all sentient beings. Many different kind of dedications. We can dedicate the merit like this. Due to these merits, may the bodhicitta that has not yet arisen in my own and others' continua, due to this merit, may the bodhicitta not yet arisen arise. May that already arisen not decline, may it not degenerate due to this merit, but may it grow ever more. And then try to seal the dedication. Once you've made the conventional dedication, and you have a strong feeling of that, then try to seal that within the apprehension of the emptiness of the three spheres. The merit being dedicated, the goal being dedicated to, and the action of dedication are all empty of inherent existence. What does that mean? Empty of inherent existence? It means they can't be found as they appear to be, existing from their own side. Where are the merits? Where is the action of dedication? Even if you had a future Buddha in front of you now, your own attainment of enlightenment, where is that enlightenment that we're imagining? It's just a name that we impute to that state. It can't be found anywhere within the basis, but is validly designated to that, just as Karen is validly designated to her collection of aggregates, but you can't find Karen within those aggregates. You can't find Catherine, you can't find Marcy within the aggregates, the basis of designation of them. You can't find enlightenment within the basis of designation of enlightenment.